Hello everybody and welcome. For those of you that have been following along my channel for last year, hey, this is the point we get to the fun part, the good part. It's the point that you get to learn through all the experience I've been through. You get to learn the benefits, all the cool little, if you will, abilities that you learn as you work through and heal and gain your consciousness. Now, those of you that are just now tuning into my channel, or this is the first video that you've seen, in the future, make sure that you're watching my videos in order. It's very important. Otherwise, you won't understand the story. You won't understand how everything is building up and into the ultimate conclusion. Now, you will realize that you'll be able to, through my experience, you'll be able to learn how to let go of your PTS, and ultimately you will gain a tremendous amount of consciousness. Even simply by watching this video, you're going to be able to gain some consciousness that's already going to get your brain to start working on purging the negative. Start recognizing how much negativity you truly have received in your life up to this point, and you'll start realizing how it does need to let it go. And through my videos, through my experience over the last year, you're going to save a lot of pain and you're going to save a tremendous amount of time, because I will do everything in my power to help walk you through, the steps I took and the benefits that I received from doing so. Now, I mentioned, PTS, post-traumatic stress, or PTSS, which is post-traumatic stress syndrome. Difference between the two is period of time, in essence, that you feel the after effects of trauma, let's say. Now, there's also PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, that is considered to be non-curable, a dead end. Now, ask yourself, why in the world would that term even exist? I mean, you think about it. Who in the world has the right to say that you are never going to be able to heal from the trauma that you've suffered in your life? Nobody. That ultimately is telling your brain it's defeated. But I assure you, it's not. And even through this video alone, I believe you'll start understanding that, hey, we have the ability to change our perception. How people tell us we're supposed to be, or how we were raised, or all the different traumas we've gone through relationships, or whether or not you've been in the military and combat, and so on. You're going to learn how to truly purge it, truly be okay with what happened, because by the time I'm done with these next few videos, well, quite a few videos, you will understand actually it was all a benefit. I know it's hard to believe. I know that those of you out there that have suffered tremendous amount of stress, it's almost incomprehensible to think that you can find something positive out of it. But I assure you, you can, and you'll see just from what I've gone through in the last year. So you might be asking, what is consciousness? Or you might have heard the term, not really understood what it is, or you might actually thought that, oh, this is some new age, some crazy, form of religion, or so on. And no, it's not. What is consciousness? Consciousness is very simply the awareness of your external self. I mean, if we all are fully aware of our external self, our physical self, if you will. And then the other half is just realizing that you have senses. You have, in essence, a soul, something inside you that gives you instinct, something that helps you know when there's somebody staring at you from behind, or when there's not good people in a room that you've never even met. It is important for you to understand how I acquired PTSD in order to understand how I became conscious. So I will be going through quickly how things that I perceived within what I refer to as the illusion, and I believe you'll understand why. Um, I refer to the illusion as before I became conscious. Now, I don't want to get into detail on the negative because honestly, it doesn't really matter at this point. But I do need for you to understand the type of trauma that I have experienced because I know that there isn't a single person in the world that can't relate to some of it. The beginning of my life was May 19th of 1970, and from what we'll move forward in this video is a quick narration of the trauma that I've experienced from the beginning of my life. As in this picture, it's a true definition of what an illusion is. And the reason why I have this is it helps your brain understand and helps your brain relate why, in essence, life is feasibly an illusion. An illusion is the distortion of senses, which can reveal how the mind normally organizes and interprets sensory stimulation. Although illusions distort the human perception of reality, they are generally shared by most people. At the beginning of my life, I had my father, my mother, and my sister that's 3 years older than me. Now, to give you an idea who my father is, he was raised German Catholic from a family that I believe loved. They just never expressed it whatsoever. He was one of 9 brothers and sisters. He was a very hardworking machinist, provided well, or at least I always considered he provided well for the family. And ultimately, there was nothing that he couldn't do with his hands. He definitely was a God-fearing man, and he had a gentle soul. He would never deliberately hurt anybody's feelings. If he did, he'd feel horrible about it. Now, also one thing that was great about him is he was good at trying to find the positive in any situation. In my childhood, the things that my father taught me was he definitely taught me to submit to your wife at all costs because my mother was extreme, but we'll get to her. And in order to not rock the boat, he ultimately would end up just submitting to whatever she said. Um, he worked hard and he was definitely a perfectionist. Realize this was back in the 70s. Everything that I'm mentioning is very standard for, I guess, those of us that are Generation X. Totally can relate. And I believe a lot of us can as well. But he was passive. He would try to not ruffle anybody's feathers. He definitely taught me the guilt of having sex. Realize he was brought up in a strong German Catholic environment, and there's an incident where I was in my teens and there was some condoms found in my bedroom, and I received an hour and a half lecture basically telling me how at least animals do it for reproduction. I also, through examples like that, I also learned the guilt that's required to truly worship God, that all of us should feel guilty, because we're all based full of sin from the very beginning. He also, and this was common in that era, he was very strong on corporal punishment. It wasn't anything extreme. He didn't use a fist or anything like that on me, but it was on the regular that I would get my butt whooped with a belt or with a hand. He also taught me helping others is one of the most gratifying things that you can do. Do not be sentimental. This man is not sentimental about anything whatsoever. I mean, there were incidences where, as he was throwing stuff away, he had made it, and I wanted to keep it, and that was just not acceptable because there's no value in stuff like that. He taught me what it is to be a man. I mean, think about it. He was my father. He was the only male role I had because I was raised out in the country in a rural area. And most of my life in my in my childhood years were in Lebanon, Oregon. I mean, and I went to a very small school. He also taught me that when you turn 18, you're on your own. There was one point in my life that he looked at me very clearly and he said that, hey, it doesn't matter if I plan on going to college or I'm going to go into the military or whatever, that I was not going to be receiving any help from my family. And he definitely stuck to that. Then we get to my mother. And I must say, my mother was the extreme opposite of my father. My father, raised out in the country, German, very religious family. And then my mom, on the other hand, she was raised in San Francisco. She was a child performer. She did tap dancing with her brothers and quite popular at it. Her parents were alcoholics and they got divorced when her younger years of her childhood, to where she had to go live with her grandmother, who was extremely abusive. I mean, I'm not talking verbally, I'm talking physically, like taking a cast iron skillet and hitting her over the head with it because she didn't clean it well enough. Now, once her and my father got married, she became a stay-at-home wife. And she truly did 95% of the parenting. Because in that area, it was very, common. My father was out working extremely hard and providing for the family, and it was my mother's place to raise the children and, have the food on the table and keep the house clean and so on. What my father didn't realize or didn't really check into was how my mother was parenting. When he was gone to work, it was a totally different scenario. But she definitely adored my sister. My sister was her everything. My mom would go with torn up clothes just so that my sister could have everything that she desired. My mom truly lived vicariously through my sister. It was like she was able to be everything she wanted to be through my sister, and ultimately she forgot about taking care of herself through weight and through mental health and so on. She struggled physically. Every ounce of my life I can remember, that she was alive. She passed away a couple years ago, and I cannot remember a single time when she didn't have something wrong, whether it was, that she was suicidal or she was just having, mental breakdowns, or her physical ailments were constantly being complained about and so on. She could definitely find the negativity in any situation, and she definitely made it known. But she truly loved the best way she knew how. Considering that my mother did 95% of the parenting, being a stay-at-home mom, um, the list of what she taught me is a lot more extensive, and this is just breaking the surface. But she definitely taught me, do not speak unless you're spoken to, be seen but not heard. Very common for that era. Um, she taught me that a daughter is the most valuable member of a family. That she was the type of woman, though, that out in public, everybody would come up to her and tell her all their deepest secrets. Everybody would open up to her. For some reason, she had an act for getting everybody to feel comfortable with her. And but the downside was, as soon as they would walk away, she would talk poorly about it. She would make fun of it, and so on. Now, she also taught me that nothing comes without strings attached. If she did something for me, I always knew she expected something in return. For example, Christmas time. Oh, she'd buy all these gifts that she wanted to give, that she'd buy them on clearance, and then peel off the clearance tag and, leave the normal price to have me feel that she spent as much on me as did my sister. And honestly, I didn't really even care, because I just usually wanted something really simple. But I never actually received what I wanted. I received what was on clearance. She was one who referred to me as the mirror image of my uncle, to the point to where she would even call me his name. His name was Taylor. And anytime she was upset at me, or even if she was trying to be nice to me, she would slip, instead of saying Trent, she would call me Taylor. And she'd laugh about it. And she's like, well, you're totally a mirror image of your uncle. Now, keep in mind, this uncle that she's referring to, he was on the run for 20 years from prison. But my whole childhood, that's who I kept getting related to. She definitely taught me that love was conditional. That if you do something wrong, you're not going to experience love. You're going to experience the true consequences of it, to the extreme level. She taught me that holidays were all for show. She would put on this big display of Christmas decorations, and the house would be perfect, and there'd be a gorgeous dinner that she prepared, and she would act like she was the happiest person on earth. But once everybody left and the door closed, it was a totally different scenario. If I ever bought my father something for Christmas that, she felt was more valuable, she would ruin Christmas Day. She would pout, she would scream, and lock herself in the room, or so on. She definitely taught me that boys do not cry. She was the type that, one time I was playing in the sprinklers when I was about 4 years old. I didn't have any underwear on, and my fly came down playing in the sprinklers out in the yard. So I ran to her and asked her to please, zip up my shorts. And when she went to zip it up, she caught my genitals. And as you can imagine, that hurt tremendously. And I started bawling. And the way she talked to me when that happened was extreme. It was basically, she said, boys don't cry, quit acting like a sissy, and so on. Which, hey, for that era, that was pretty common. On the positive side, she taught me how to accomplish anything artistically as long as you could perceive it. This woman could accomplish anything she desired. I mean, whether it be Fabergé eggs, whether it be quilting, whether it be Russian needle punch, or so on. There was nothing that she could not accomplish, and she loved it. And matter of fact, one of the last questions I asked her was, what were her happiest moments in life? And because I was expecting her to tell me some deep, deep things that I would be able to carry on with me. And she looked at me and she said, I really loved it when everybody, appreciated my artwork. I was just like, oh, okay. Anyway, moving on. Oh, amazing. Probably the most valuable lesson, or one of the two most valuable lessons, is because of her being from San Francisco. She was used to being exposed to different ethnicities, different races. And what she definitely taught me was there is only one race. And she considered it God's race. Whether the color of the skin, whether or not someone was homosexual, was none of our business. It's not our place to judge them. The only way you can judge them is how they treat you. Which, hey, that's what all of us need to learn. She also taught me that we decide our fate. And the ultimate way she did that was she chose to go off dialysis and ultimately end her life. And imagine the amount of courage that took for someone to be able to do that, knowing that she was getting ready to die. But I believe she was confident on what was on the other side, or what is on the other side. And a huge lesson she taught me was it can't always be everybody else's fault. I mean, hey, I was a kid. I tried to talk my way out of it because I knew I was going to get in some serious trouble. But she would just look at me and she'd just say, Trent or Taylor, it can't always be someone else's fault. You have to take responsibility for what you've done, or you will never learn from it. And that is a huge message and incredibly valuable. Now we get to my sister. And she was a result of her childhood, I guess you could say. She was also a Scorpio. Not to place judgment on Scorpios, but she definitely had the traits that are listed for a Scorpio. She was 3 years older than me. She was a model, a gymnast, a cheerleader, Strawberry Fair princess, I think even a queen. And she was incredibly popular. She was good looking, and she got to do anything and everything that she wanted because my mom was always pushing her to achieve the next thing and always coaching her, at home on, how to rise to a higher popularity level, if you will. My sister was extremely independent when it came towards me. I mean, the truth was, she hated the fact that she had a brother. You know, she wanted to be the only child, and she kind of sort of got her way when it came to any type of event as far as how she was treated. Um, she did not feel, like I said, that she needed a sibling by any means. Um, she definitely knew how to get anything she desired. She knew how to play the mind games on my mother because ultimately my mother taught her how. Um, what my sister taught me was who definitely how to survive psychological warfare. I mean, this to give you an idea of the type of relationship we had through mom and dad fighting. I thought there was a point that they were going to get a divorce, and it was when I was about 10 years old. And my sister was in the bathroom. She was curling her hair back in those days. And I just opened the door, and her and I weren't fighting or nothing. And I looked at her and I said, "Hey, Tammy, I don't know, what's going to happen with us if mom and dad get divorced. But I want you to know that I love you and I always will." And she set that curling iron down. She turned and looked at me straight in the face. And she goes, "Trent, when are you going to realize I don't love you and I never will?" And then she closed the door in my face. That was just the norm of how she treated me because, in essence, she thought I was a nuisance to her life. Um, she definitely taught me that some people are just incapable of loving, truly loving, unconditional or loving because of being family and so on. And she taught me how love is ultimately used as a tool. To give you an idea of how the first 17 years of my life was, um, I remember back pretty much any occasion when I had the house to myself, I would look all through the house because I absolutely swore that I was going to find adoption papers. Because deep, deep in my heart, I felt like this is not the way love is supposed to work. And why in the world wouldn't parents love the way they're supposed to? I didn't know at that time, obviously, that people can only love to the extent that they've been taught, or to the extent to where they can self-reflect and learn. Um, I definitely had a feeling that my parents, did not want me. I mean, I even at points heard them arguing back and forth, on who wanted me, who wanted another child, and so on. I also felt as if the only time I had a voice was if I was to do something good out of labor. When I was in high school, I freshman year in high school, I competed in regional skills contest and I ended up taking first place. So at that point, I realized, oh hey, I am something. When I can, truly have a voice, when I'm recognized, is when I'm able to truly express myself through things I do in labor and through mowing lawns. I can buy clothes. Through pulling weeds, I can get out of getting in trouble. I always knew that I was going to get in trouble anytime the grass was growing tall or the weeds in the yards were growing because they would find a reason to punish me so that I would go do it. Ultimately, hey, we should all help out in the family and we should all do things, but Unfortunately, it was used as a way of disciplining. So I ended up becoming a loner. As the years went on, by the time I was about 10 years old, um, I started becoming more and more quiet. I didn't really want to hang out with anybody. Um, I I was getting suppressed. I felt as if my voice was stifled, and I didn't really want people coming around. My mother, because she would end up going off or making a scene in front of them. Um, I started feeling as if there was truly no value in my life. I uh, I remember many a times laying on my bed and thinking to myself, why keep living? But then I always had this something inside me that made me determine that I am not going to give up. I am not going to do anything like harm myself simply out of feeling sorry for myself. That I was determined to survive. So I guess you could say my survival instinct, was truly starting to kick in. Um, I did feel as if nobody in the world felt the way I did. Um, I've used the term before that I felt like I was, before, my life, like I was an amoeba floating around in the universe, and I just happened to land on Earth because nobody loved the way I loved, and nobody seemed to think the way I thought. But in the early years, the first 17 years of my life, I definitely learned survival techniques, being raised by my mother, I and how my sister treated me, and how I didn't really get any backup or protection from through my father. I started realizing how to become a man, how to handle things without any additional help from anyone else. Things that I would turn to um, would be like music. The two most common songs that I remember finding comfort through is I would lay on my bed, after getting in trouble, and I would either hear the words to the song in my head or I'd put on an old Walkman. And one song was Rock Me Amadeus by Falco, which I just liked how it seemed almost kind of like a naughty song. And then the second song was the song that goes like I wear my sunglasses at night, because I would just lay there with my eyes closed and listen to that song. And to me, that's how my soul felt. Like I just wanted to drift through life without being noticed, because if I wasn't noticed, I wouldn't feel any more trauma, wouldn't feel any more pain. And I definitely learned how to prevent emotional dominance. My sister and my mother, the way they treated me and the way they would verbally beat me down, I definitely learned some resilience. At age 18, I had joined the Marine Corps, and I joined with a buddy program from a person I met in high school that was basically going through the same thing as I was. And we made a pact that we wanted to make our lives count for something. So we wanted to join the Marine Corps, and we wanted to be infantry because we wanted to be on the front line, and we wanted to die for our country. So at least we felt like our lives meant something. Unfortunately, we ended up getting separated in boot camp, because they ended up moving me to helicopters because of my test scores and so on. and he ended up continuing on into infantry, and ultimately he saw some horrendous things, and then he ended up dying from testicular cancer. Now, I started acting out. In my teen years, I acted out. I was not perfect. In grade school, I would do anything to try to get some attention, whether it be positive or negative, because I wasn't getting, really any attention at home. So I turned to negative things to get some attention. And doing so, boy, I'd get the old paddle, with round holes in it. I would on average, see the principal in grade school probably once a week, and get a good old paddle, and then I'd get home and I'd get a whooping for getting a paddle in at school. But in Marine Corps, I started, trying different approaches, learning how to, associate with other people, ultimately trying to make friends the wrong way. There was a time when I was stationed in Iwakuni, Japan, that a guy that I became friends with wanted to go out in public in Japan and do something that was illegal, and I didn't want to look like a wussy, so I went along with it, and I shouldn't have. And I, up until recently, I have regretted that from that point on. That because it was something that we shouldn't have done. It wasn't against anybody physically or anything like that. We just had vandalized a vehicle. And Japanese people are amazing, kind people, or at least all the ones that I have met. But after that, after being stationed in Japan, I went back to the United States, and I joined another squadron. Then I went to combat for Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and was there 8.5 months. And those of you that are combat veterans that have seen live fire, frontline action, you know what it's like. I don't need to go into it. And anybody who doesn't know what it's like, watch a movie that shows it, and feel with your soul what it must feel like to be those veterans, those soldiers that are on the front line. And you can picture all the trauma there. I'm not going to go into it. But once I got back from combat, I went to what's called SEER School, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. It's basically a POW training school. It teaches you how to, if you're captured, how to be a POW and not give up the vital information that they don't want you to give up. So, and this is considered the most extreme school in the world. Past video, I discussed a little bit about it, and in regards to an amazing woman that went through it with me. Anyways, so after SEER School, I got married. I got married very quickly. We only knew each other 3 weeks. She was from the Philippines. She got her U.S. citizenship for joining the U.S. Marine Corps. And we'd only known each other 3 weeks. And the reason why I felt that she was someone for me to marry was because she treated me absolutely horribly. She yelled at me all the time. I never felt as if I could do anything right. The truth is, I didn't even realize it, but I was choosing somebody that treated me just like my mother, because I felt that if she treats me that poorly, she's got to love me. Otherwise, she wouldn't be getting upset at me if she didn't care about me. Very unhealthy thought. But we all go through these phases, all have to learn by the negative experiences that we're subjected to and find the positive and grow from it. So her and I got married. 3 weeks after marriage, I got orders to Norway. As soon as I left port, headed to Norway, I started receiving letters that she wanted a divorce because she didn't want to be with somebody that was going to be deployed. And to not get into the extreme detail, she ended up setting up things, and to where when I got back from my 6-month deployment, I was greeted by the Naval Investigation Service, and they wanted to know why I had things that I shouldn't have had. And at that point, as the investigation went on, I saw how the my command was not willing to back me up because it was Bill Clinton era and extreme cutbacks. So they deferred it to a different command because they said that they couldn't be non-biased, that they would totally back me up. And at that point, I decided that even though I could prove what she had done, it was so obvious and so easy to prove, I decided to take the easiest route to get out of the military because I knew that it wasn't my band of brothers. And in order to do so, I ended up spending some time in confinement in the military brig, and then I ended up getting the discharge like I wanted because my attorney told me that that was the quickest way that I could get out of the military if that's what I truly wanted. So that's the route I took. SEER school and marriage definitely taught me the levels of psychological warfare. And being in confinement, because I was in there for only, a non-standard amount of time, I ended up spending it all in solitary confinement. And once you do that, you really get a chance to start reflecting and start deciding what direction you want your life to go in. So the first wife, taught me true betrayal. I mean, by her setting me up, she was able to end up getting my house, getting every ounce of my possessions, because she was able to get me incarcerated. And because she got me incarcerated, or because I choose to take that route to get out quick, the military said that she got to keep, in essence, everything I had because she had had a son now living with her that I didn't even know existed. And she had moved her mother in from the Philippines that I wasn't aware of until I got back. Now, lessons I learned from my age 18 to 25, truly learned that nobody has the same perception on any outcome. That every single one of us has a totally different perception on every single event. Now, granted, there are similarities in a perception, but nobody truly has the exact same perception. Also learned that, I don't know, at that point I didn't know how to find love. Heck, I didn't even know truly what love is. To me, love was a matter of, a measurement of how much pleasure I could give to someone else. And the more pleasure I could give someone else, the more I understood what love was. And I started to realize as an adult how to survive without any help from anybody. I mean, I'd been what I considered betrayed by my command, my wife, my family definitely wasn't there to even attempt to try to help at all. And so I had to figure this out on my own. I developed the ability and the determination to break my patterns. One, I didn't want to repeat the patterns that my parents had done if I ever became a parent, because I knew that wasn't right. I also didn't want to keep doing the type of actions, making friends and stuff, because I saw the negative results that kept coming from that. So I ultimately learned how to master what's referred to as the chameleon effect. I could literally reinvent my personality, how I acted. For example, when I became a car salesman, I learned to use my hands more and more in a feminine nature so that clients would end up feeling comfortable with you, because I'm a larger man and have a tendency to be intimidating to people. I also learned what, favorable traits worked in different situations. So once I got out of the military, in a very short period of time, I ended up having my first two daughters. They're about 11 months apart from each other. And their mother she ended up being diagnosed with um, borderline personality disorder. She was a compulsive cheater, and so on. So I knew that no matter what, I needed to get my children away from her, because she was doing things like having sex in front of them with strangers a lot, and so on. So I began a 8-year custody battle. But as that custody battle began, and after I decided to leave her, of course, I lost all my possessions again, because one day I came home after work and she had cleaned out the house, everything. I mean, my clothes, my tools, every ounce of everything I owned. And I ultimately never got it back either. But that era, um, men don't really have rights when it comes to custody. The courts felt that the children should always be with their mother. Lessons I learned from that era was, when kids are involved, personal needs totally come secondary. How, no matter what it takes, you have to protect and give love to your children. And no matter how bad a custody battle is, you don't say anything about the other parent, because all you're going to do is you're going to hurt your children. And why in the world would you want to hurt your children if you truly love them? And no matter what, it doesn't matter if they're children or not, protect the innocent. I started developing a trait where if I ever saw like a man hitting a woman, I didn't care what the risk was, I would break it up. Or if I saw two people fighting, I would break it up, because it just wasn't wrong and it didn't sit well within my soul, if you will. As the custody battle continued, I ended up rather quickly starting a relationship with my attorney. I ran out of money because the mother of my two eldest had drained all the money out of my account, and I got to a point where I couldn't afford to continue to fight the custody battle. And my attorney came up with the idea that, hey, do some work around here and I'll represent you for free, because she felt she had never met any father that deserved custody of his children more than I did. So then, while the attorney and I were together, we ended up having my youngest daughter. And, but it wasn't like it was all happy and fuzzy between the attorney and I. She didn't want me to go out in public with her because she was afraid that judges might see her with me. I mean, ultimately, she was standing pregnant with my child in front of the judge when she was representing me. So I was kind of shunned again. It was a matter of didn't want to be seen with me, didn't want to really do things in public with me, and so on. But I was okay with that because that's how my childhood was. So I was able to, I'd already, developed the survival skills for that. She also was a cheater. fairly quickly on. She, cheated on me to be with the person that she cheated on to be with me, and so on. And she ended up doing that like 12 times, and it wasn't simple. It was rather extreme. For example, she had thrown my daughters and I out just so that she could have an affair, and we went and stayed in a funeral home where I'd been working at the time. Um, she was also the type that nothing was ever good enough. I built a 8,800 square foot home mansion, and I did 100% of it myself. I mean, I worked a year and a half, 18-hour days, 7 days a week, and all she ever did was complain. And ultimately, I asked her, "Why did you never, compliment anything or ever say thank you?" And she just looked at me and she was like, "I was afraid if I showed appreciation, then you would think I owed you something." And she was very strong on me not speaking out in the courtroom or causing any type of resistance to what was going on. She would always say, well, anything I was feeling emotional about or struggling with through the custody battle, um, she just kept telling me that I needed to just stay quiet. Ultimately, that ended up being the best thing, but at the time, I definitely felt as if my voice was being stifled. Um, she also would, take off and leave my daughters and I and be gone for a week. I wouldn't know where she was. She wouldn't call her anything, and then she'd show back home, show back, show back up home, drunk and so on. So it wasn't uncommon for her to abandon. And once again, during this time frame, I was burglarized again. And this time they took every single thing I owned. Um, at that time, it was about $100,000 worth of paid off tools and equipment that ultimately ended up being, all my savings because I had to rebuy it again to keep my employees working. The lessons I learned from 29 to 36 was extreme self-control. I'm very thankful for that era because going through that long of a custody battle, you learn how to keep your mouth shut. And you, through being under the eyes of the court, you learn how to not do anything that could be viewed as wrong as a parent. That's not all positive, but it ended up being a good thing for me because I do not regret at all how, I treated my children when they were growing up. And I definitely got reinforced to never expect anything in return for something I've done. And I started being okay with it. I've always been an incredibly generous person. And people said, why do you keep doing that when you keep getting taken advantage of? And I would just tell them that I refuse to not believe that I can find good people in this world. Some things that happened from 36 to 50 was I had gone into a business partner type arrangement with a construction company and ended up finding out that my partner had embezzled 500,000. So you can imagine how that felt. And ultimately, I ended up getting out rather quickly just because I didn't want to deal with that type of situation anymore and took a huge loss. Um, then I met my second wife. The way I met her was I truly ended up um, preventing her from committing suicide. She was one of these people that raised an extreme religious background, had her brothers, two of them had attempted suicide. You know, her mom was a homeschooling psychologist, in an extreme religious background. You know, so you can imagine how all of those things ended up playing together. And the way we ended up getting married was, after she attempted suicide, her roommates didn't want her, you know, there. Her parents didn't want her at home. So I offered for her to move in with me. And when she did, we started being intimate. And then her guilt kicked in from a religious perspective of having sex and not being married. So I made the decision to go ahead and get married, and because I cared about her. I just want her to know what it was like to truly feel love, because I knew what it was like living, you know, at that point 45 years of my life without ever actually feeling love in return. Um, she she ended up having an affair, getting, you know, pregnant, and so we ended up getting a divorce. That's as far as I'm going to go into that. There's a lot more to it, but you get the gist of it. The common occurrence, when we were married for the 2.5 years, was uh, self-harming. You know, taking her to psychologists on a regular basis, uh, mental breakdowns at home, and so on. But I was determined not to hold that against her, because I understood. Then I became a tattoo artist, and as I was, you know, tattooing clients, and from day one I was incredibly busy, and majority of my clients were female, and every single one of them, it seemed like, would dump on me all the negativity that was happening in their life. Um, and I started noticing a pattern that as they were talking about all this negativity, there's a recurrence of it was constantly feeling sorry for themselves. I also realized how many people in the young generation are self-harming, you know, cutting themselves. How many of them have anxiety, and how many have PTSD and accept it, and almost give up on even trying to move past the stress. And ultimately it felt to me as if they just were stuck in feeling sorry for themselves, stuck in the trauma that had been projected onto them, if you will. Lessons I learned from that era was the impact of unhealthy parenting, you know, because I saw it through the ex-wife. I saw it from the results of my children, and how their mother in 8 years were able to create such a tremendous amount of negativity in their brains, because ultimately you think about, your parents are the ones that program you of all the dangers of what to look out for. They're trying to protect you, but a child's brain is like a sponge that will just soak it all up. And I learned that guilt-driven religion is kind of scary, because seeing so many negative results from people that were raised in a guilt-driven and religious environment, that I started questioning, you know, how could that possibly be the right thing? And also realized through charity work, trying to help the homeless and so on, that most people don't want solution more than anything. They're just wanting sympathy. They want someone to feel sorry for them with them we've all heard the expression, misery enjoys company. So I continued to pour into my tattooing business. I was 7 days a week, about 14 hours a day, and I loved it because I was able to give a gift to people. I was able to express myself. I charged low rates, and I was giving them top quality service. And it felt good because I knew that people would have something for the rest of their life that I did out of truly love. I wanted to keep getting better and better, and I got to the point to where I could actually do holographic style tattoos and 3D tattoos that change as they turn. But also during this time frame, I started dating again, and I repeated the pattern. I took on somebody that was incredibly depressed, somebody that was addicted to drugs, and I tried to fix her. I was trying to fix anybody because ultimately, looking back, I realized I was broken myself. And if I couldn't fix myself, then I would try to fix anybody around me. And her and I were together for a couple years, and then her mental illness was extreme. I mean, I took her to a program within the hospital. It was considered like an outpatient program for people with mental health issues. And I literally did every single thing I could for this person. I supported her. She didn't have to work unless she wanted to. I gave her spending money. Every tattooed, like 30 some tattoos on her, covered her body in tattoos. Anything I could do to show her love, because to me it felt good to give love. But it didn't matter what I did, she was still struggling, and she was never able to see the good in what I was doing for her, never showed any appreciation, and so on. And her mental health wasn't getting better. So I had heard about the war in Ukraine, and to me, I thought, hey, this is a way for the world to see who I am, just how good of a person I am in my soul, and be able to get, if you will, some recognition with the world so that I have a voice. And I figured that my girlfriend at the time, that she would have to wake up and see that, oh wow, this is a good man, that I'm not cheating, or I'm not doing any of the insecurities that she had from me being a tattoo artist. And so I went to Ukraine, and let's just say I was there long enough to learn the time I was in combat before wasn't even remotely as bad as the short period of time I was in Ukraine. Totally different war, totally different circumstance, 100% volunteer. I was by myself most of the time. And that opens you up from a spiritual perspective that you can't imagine. And I definitely, while I was there, I had to learn the importance of pulling yourself together, self-reflecting, analyzing every single action you do, because if you don't, you're going to die. And when I got back from Ukraine, I was starting to recognize that I was broken. And I knew that the only way I could help her heal was that I had to heal myself, and that in order for her to love me, she had to learn to love herself. So I broke up with her, and long story short, she lived with me for a couple months, and then she moved away. And then she came back to show me that everything had changed, or at least I thought that's what she was doing. But then she ended up having ulterior motives, which led to her doing everything in her power to try to destroy anything that was important to me and take everything away from me. But I don't want to get into that. I'll have to dabble in it a little bit as I explain how the steps of me waking up came about. But the goal from this point forward isn't to point out any negativity, because negativity just keeps feeding on itself and draining everybody. And you're not going to heal, you're not going to move forward if you keep allowing yourself to be exposed to negativity. In the next video, I get to start pointing out the positive, and how my brain just started waking up and realizing anything I wanted to know, the truths, if you will, how they just started popping left and right. And it all started December 25th of 2023, and it truly changed my existence forever. If you choose to subscribe, you'll be notified when the next video is out. I've never asked anybody to subscribe because I know everything will happen exactly how it's meant to be. And if there's anything that I can do to help anybody, if anybody's struggling to find the positive in your life, I would be honored to help. I know that how I talk on camera is a little sporadic or might seem a little unorganized or whatever, but realize I refuse to edit any of my videos because I'm just talking to you from the heart. And if you need help, feel free to go ahead and leave a comment, and I'll answer any question you might have. Or if you want it to be, a little more private, you can send me a private email, like it says there, at trentsuing@gmail.com. And when I say this, I truly mean this from my heart. This isn't a cliche, but the good within me, the love within me, truly loves the good within you. And once you wake up, once you gain your consciousness, you'll realize that the only good that exists is true love. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.